The message arrived in Berlin on a cold November morning in 1943. Decoded by German intelligence officers, it contained precise details. Allied troop movements in southern England, tank divisions massing near Dover, supply depots overflowing with ammunition. The source was considered impeccable. A Spanish businessman with access to British military circles, code-named Alaric by the Abwehr. His information had proven reliable before. This time he reported something extraordinary. A massive invasion force preparing to strike across the narrowest point of the English Channel, directly at Calais. German high command studied the intelligence with satisfaction. The Allies were predictable. Calais made perfect strategic sense. The shortest route to the continent, the fastest path to the industrial heartland. They began reinforcing their positions along the Pas-de-Calais, pulling resources from other coastal sectors. What they didn't know was that Alaric didn't exist. The Spanish businessman was a fiction. And the army gathering near Dover was made of rubber tanks, wooden planes and painted canvas. Every word the Germans read was written in London. Every troop movement they tracked was choreographed for their eyes. The intelligence network they trusted had been turned inside out, transformed into a weapon more devastating than any bomber formation. This is the story of how Britain didn't just fight a war of armies. It fought a war of minds, where the battlefield was inside enemy headquarters, and the ammunition was belief itself. To understand how this became possible, we must return to the summer of 1940, when Britain stood alone. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force barely escaped at Dunkirk. Invasion seemed inevitable. German forces controlled the European coastline from Norway to Spain. Their intelligence service, the Abwehr, had spent years cultivating networks of agents across Britain. Sleeper cells, informants, sympathizers ready to provide the information needed for a successful invasion. But something unexpected happened. As these agents were activated, as they began transmitting reports back to their handlers in Hamburg and Berlin, British counterintelligence was listening. Not just to some of them. To all of them. The reason was simple. There were no successful German agents operating freely in Britain. Every single one had been caught. This wasn't luck. It was the result of a systematic operation run by a small, secretive organization based in a nondescript building on St. James's Street in London. They called it the 20 Committee, though everyone referred to it by its Roman numeral designation, the XX Committee. Double cross. The concept was radical. Instead of simply arresting enemy agents, what if they could be turned? What if captured spies could be convinced, through persuasion, blackmail or ideological conversion, to work for Britain while appearing to serve Germany? The Germans would still receive intelligence reports from their networks. But now, every word would be controlled. The enemy wouldn't lose their sources. They would lose something far more valuable, the ability to distinguish truth from deception. The man who oversaw this operation was a former military intelligence officer named John Masterman. Methodical, analytical, with a chess player's mind for seeing moves ahead, Masterman understood that espionage wasn't just about gathering information. It was about shaping what the enemy believed. If you controlled what they knew, you controlled their decisions. Control their decisions and you could choreograph their defeat. But there was a problem. Turned agents to be believed, their information couldn't be entirely false. The Germans weren't fools. If reports consistently proved wrong, they would suspect compromise and shut down the network. The intelligence had to be credible, which meant mixing truth with lies in precise proportions. Some information had to be genuine, even valuable. Just never valuable enough to threaten actual operations. And when it mattered most, when decisions of existential importance hung in the balance, the lies had to be perfect. This created a paradox. To deceive the enemy about the big things, you had to tell them truth about small things. To make them trust you completely, you had to give them victories. The art was in calibrating exactly what to sacrifice and what to protect. The first major test came with an agent the British code named Tate. His real name was Wolf Schmidt, a Danish citizen recruited by the Abwehr and parachuted into England in September 1940. He was captured within hours of landing, his radio and codes intact. Faced with execution as a spy, Schmidt made a choice. He agreed to transmit under British control. 4 weeks, Tate sent weather reports and minor observations back to Hamburg. The information was accurate but operationally useless. Conditions the Germans could verify independently. Slowly, German controllers began to trust him. They sent funds. They requested more detailed intelligence. And the 20 Committee began experimenting with what they could make Berlin believe. Tate reported seeing troop movements that didn't exist. Dummy airfields under construction. supply convoys heading to non-existent bases. The Germans accepted it because everything else he reported checked out. By early 1941, Tate was considered one of the Abwehr's most reliable sources in England. In reality, every word he transmitted was written by British intelligence officers in a cramped office in London, crafted to plant ideas in enemy minds. But Tate was just one agent. The system's true power emerged when the British realized they controlled not just individuals, but entire networks. By mid-1941, every German spy in Britain was either captured, executed, or operating under British control. The Abwehr didn't know their intelligence network had become a British instrument. They believed they had eyes across the island. In truth, they were staring at a mirror that showed only what London wanted them to see. This created an unprecedented opportunity. If the British controlled all German intelligence sources in Britain, they could construct entire fictional realities. They could invent armies, fabricate strategies, and make the enemy redeploy thousands of real troops to counter threats that existed only on paper. But for this to work at scale, the deception had to be coordinated across every channel. Radio transmissions, physical evidence, diplomatic chatter, even careless talk in pubs frequented by neutral diplomats, all of it had to tell the same false story. One contradiction, one detail that didn't match, and the entire edifice would collapse. The architect of this coordinated deception was a man named Dudley Clarke, a British Army officer who understood that modern war was fought as much through perception as firepower. In 1940, Clarke proposed creating a dedicated unit for strategic deception, not just tactical tricks, but operations designed to shape enemy strategy at the highest level. His ideas seemed almost fantastical. Create phantom armies. Stage fake invasions. Use double agents to feed false intelligence that would cause the enemy to redeploy forces, waste resources, and make catastrophic strategic miscalculations. The concept faced skepticism. War was fought with tanks and planes, not theater and illusion. But Clarke had something powerful on his side. Britain was losing. Conventional approaches weren't working. Desperation made innovation possible. By 1942, Clarke's unit was operational, working in close coordination with the XX Committee. They began to understand something profound. In modern warfare with intelligence networks, aerial reconnaissance and radio intercepts, the enemy was constantly trying to build a picture of your capabilities and intentions. This picture existed in their minds, constructed from fragments of information. If you controlled those fragments, you controlled the picture. And if you controlled the picture, you could make them see whatever you wanted. This wasn't just about lying. It was about understanding how the enemy analyzed information, what they expected to see, what would confirm their assumptions. The best deceptions didn't fight against enemy expectations. They used those expectations as weapons. You showed them what they were already predisposed to believe, then led them into decisions that served your purposes. The technique was called ambiguity creation and resolution. First, you created uncertainty, contradictory signals that made the enemy unsure of your true intentions. Then gradually you provided information that seemed to resolve the ambiguity, leading them to a conclusion. But the conclusion was false. They felt they had figured out your plan through their own intelligence work, which made them believe it even more strongly. By early 1943, the strategic situation had shifted. The tide was turning. Allied forces had landed in North Africa. The Soviet Union had held at Stalingrad. Now the question wasn't if the Allies would invade occupied Europe, but when and where. Everyone knew it was coming. The Germans knew it. The challenge wasn't to hide the invasion. That was impossible. The challenge was to make them defend the wrong place. This was the moment when the entire double-cross system, years in the making, would face its ultimate test. The operation that would emerge was code-named Fortitude, and it would become the most elaborate deception in military history. The goal was simple to state, monumentally difficult to execute. Convince German high command that the main Allied invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. Make them believe it so completely that even after the real landings began in Normandy, they would still think Calais was the primary target and hold their strongest forces there, waiting for an attack that would never come. To accomplish this, the Allies needed to create an entire fictional invasion force. Not just on paper but credible in every way the Germans could verify. This phantom army needed realistic command structures, radio traffic patterns, supply movements, and physical presence that aerial reconnaissance could photograph. It needed to be large enough to threaten Calais, at least 1 million men, thousands of tanks, hundreds of landing craft. The army group was called FUSAG, 1st United States Army Group. On organizational charts, it was commanded by General George Patton, America's most aggressive and well-known commander. To German intelligence this made perfect sense. If the Americans were planning a major assault, they would put Patton in charge. His presence in southeastern England, opposite Calais, seemed to confirm where the blow would fall. But Fusag didn't exist. Patton was real, deliberately positioned where German agents could spot him. But his army was a fabrication built from inflatable rubber tanks, wooden aircraft, painted canvas landing craft, and fake radio traffic generated by a handful of signal operators simulating the communications of entire divisions. In fields across Kent and Sussex, the British erected what appeared from the air to be massive military encampments. Tents by the thousands, vehicle parks, ammunition dumps, field hospitals, all hollow shells designed to look real in reconnaissance photographs. They even generated heat signatures and light patterns at night consistent with active military bases. German planes photographed them. The evidence matched what their agents reported. Fusag became real in German minds. But physical deception alone wasn't enough. The Germans needed to hear the army as well as see it. Every military unit generates distinctive radio traffic, command communications, logistics coordination, routine administrative chatter. The patterns are as unique as fingerprints. German signals intelligence monitored Allied radio transmissions constantly, building pictures of unit locations and command structures from traffic analysis. So the British created phantom radio networks. Small teams of operators simulated the communications of entire divisions, following realistic patterns. More traffic during planning phases, coordination between units that would need to work together, even the kind of routine messages that characterized garrison life. They made mistakes deliberately, let some transmissions be sent in lower-grade codes the Germans could break, feeding intelligence that confirmed Fusag's existence and preparations. The Germans intercepted it all. Their analysts noted the buildup, tracked unit movements, estimated strength. Everything pointed to a massive force preparing to launch from southeastern England toward Calais. And through it all, the double agents confirmed what the Germans were seeing. Tate reported increased military activity in Kent. Another agent, codenamed Garbo, perhaps the most successful double agent in history, sent detailed reports of divisions arriving, supplies being stockpiled, amphibious training exercises. Garbo's information seemed so reliable that the Germans awarded him an Iron Cross, transmitted congratulations in Morse code. In reality, Garbo was a Spanish citizen named Juan Pujol Garcia, operating from London under British control, inventing a fictional network of sub-agents and feeding German intelligence whatever the 20 Committee scripted. What made Garbo particularly effective was that he didn't just report facts, he analyzed them. He offered interpretations, drew conclusions, sometimes got things slightly wrong in ways that made him seem more genuine. His reports had the texture of real intelligence. Incomplete, occasionally contradictory, requiring interpretation. This made German analysts trust their own conclusions when they pieced together his information. They weren't being told what to think. They were figuring it out themselves, or so they believed. As planning for the actual invasion progressed, the deception had to accomplish something even more delicate. The Germans needed to believe Normandy was possible but less likely than Calais. If Normandy seemed impossible, the sudden appearance of invasion forces there would immediately reveal the deception. But if Normandy seemed like the obvious choice, German forces would mass there, and the real invasion would face catastrophic resistance. The solution was to make Normandy appear to be a secondary target, a diversionary attack designed to draw German forces away from the real assault at Calais. This meant the deception had to work in stages. Before the invasion, Calais is the target. During the invasion, Normandy is a diversion. After the invasion, Calais remains the primary threat. This last phase was crucial. Even after Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the deception needed to hold. If the Germans realized immediately that Normandy was the real invasion and Calais a phantom threat, they could rush their reserves to the actual battlefield. The goal was to keep powerful German units frozen in place, defending against Fusag's non-existent divisions, for weeks after the Normandy landings. The strain on the double-agent network during this period was immense. Messages had to be precisely timed. If they revealed the Normandy landings too early, the Germans might suspect the agents were compromised. If they reported too late, the agents would lose credibility for missing such a massive operation. Controllers in London calibrated every transmission to the hour. Garbo sent a message to his handlers just before the landings, warning that something significant was happening in the Portsmouth area. Technical difficulties delayed the message until after the invasion began. A deliberate failure, that made Garbo seem more credible because he had tried to warn them but was thwarted by circumstances beyond his control. His German handlers accepted the explanation and continued to trust his intelligence. Then, in the days after D-Day, Garbo sent his most important message. Based on what he was observing, he reported that the Normandy landings appeared to be a diversion. The real invasion force, Patton's Fusag, was still massing in southeastern England, preparing to strike at Calais. He advised German High Command not to commit their strategic reserves to Normandy, as the main assault was yet to come. German intelligence found his analysis compelling because it matched their own assessment. Calais made strategic sense. Normandy seemed too far from Germany's industrial centers, too far from the quickest path into the Reich. Surely the Allies wouldn't choose the longer, more difficult route. Garbo's report confirmed what they wanted to believe. Wehrmacht commanders kept entire divisions in the Pas-de-Calais region, waiting for Fusag's assault. The 15th Army, Germany's strongest force in France, remained largely in place, guarding against the phantom American Army Group. Meanwhile, in Normandy, Allied forces fought against fierce but numerically limited opposition. The divisions that could have crushed the beachhead stayed hundreds of kilometers away, defending empty beaches against inflatable tanks. The deception held for weeks. Throughout June and July 1944, as Allied forces expanded their foothold in Normandy, German commanders hesitated to fully commit their reserves. Intelligence continued to indicate that Patton's force remained in England, poised to strike. They couldn't risk weakening Calais defenses when the main blow might still fall there. By the time German High Command realized the truth, Allied armies had broken out of the Normandy Peninsula. The delay in committing German reserves, caused entirely by belief in phantom threats, gave the invasion the breathing room it needed to succeed. Military historians estimate that Operation Fortitude may have shortened the war in Europe by months, saving hundreds of thousands of lives. The extraordinary thing is how little physical resources this required. The entire deception apparatus, the inflatable tanks, the fake installations, the radio operators, the double agents, cost less than a single day of actual military operations. Yet it achieved what countless bombs and bullets could not. It paralyzed enemy decision-making at the strategic level. But there was a darker side to this success that reveals something uncomfortable about the nature of information warfare. The British hadn't just deceived German intelligence. They had created a complete informational environment that trapped enemy commanders in a fictional reality. The Germans didn't make bad decisions because they were incompetent. They made bad decisions because every source of information they trusted was corrupted. This raises a question that resonates far beyond 1944. When you control all the information someone receives, when you shape every input they use to understand the world, how free are their choices? The German commanders thought they were making rational decisions based on the best available intelligence. They didn't know the intelligence itself was a weapon. In a sense, the greatest military innovation of the Second World War wasn't radar or the atomic bomb. It was the systematic weaponization of belief. The Allies discovered that in the age of modern intelligence networks, you could fight wars not just by destroying enemy forces, but by controlling what enemy commanders believed about reality itself. This had profound implications that extended beyond military deception. After the war, the techniques developed by the 20 Committee and Strategic Deception Units were studied intensively. The Cold War would become a conflict defined by information control, perception management, and the manipulation of belief systems on global scales. The methods pioneered in the double-cross system, creating controlled channels, mixing truth with falsehood, using enemy expectations against them, became foundational to modern intelligence operations. John Masterman, reflecting on the double-cross system years later, wrote that the greatest challenge wasn't technical, it was psychological. The hardest part was maintaining the discipline to play a long game, to sacrifice small advantages for larger strategic victories, to resist the temptation to use the system for immediate tactical gains that might compromise its long-term value. There were moments of tension. Real operations occasionally conflicted with deception plans. Field commanders wanted intelligence from captured agents, not realizing those agents were more valuable sending false reports to the enemy. There were close calls when German counterintelligence grew suspicious. The entire system could have collapsed from a single careless mistake. What held it together was an understanding that the double agents weren't just sources of deception, they were investments in shaping enemy strategic thinking. Every message sent, every piece of false intelligence delivered, was a brick in a larger architecture of belief. The goal wasn't to win individual deceptions, but to construct a comprehensive alternate reality in enemy minds. The German intelligence officers who analyzed reports from Britain believed they were good at their jobs. They cross-checked sources, looked for inconsistencies, applied rigorous analytical methods. They found confirmation across multiple channels because British controllers ensured every channel told the same story. The Germans didn't fail because they were careless. They failed because the information environment they operated in was completely controlled by their enemy. In the summer of 1945, after Germany's surrender, Outwitted records were captured and analyzed. British intelligence officers discovered just how successful the double-cross system had been. Not only had every German agent in Britain been controlled, but German intelligence had never seriously questioned their network's integrity. They had trusted their sources until the end. Some German officers, when informed after the war that their entire British network had been compromised, refused to believe it. The idea seemed impossible. How could every single agent have been turned? How could such an elaborate deception have been maintained for years without a single failure? It violated everything they understood about intelligence work. But that was precisely the point. The British had achieved something that seemed impossible by systematically controlling every variable. They didn't leave anything to chance. They monitored all communications, verified every detail, coordinated every element of the deception across multiple channels. The Germans couldn't imagine this level of control, so they didn't suspect it. There's a principle in deception operations. The bigger the lie, the more believable it becomes, because people assume no one would attempt something so audacious unless it were true. Small lies invite skepticism. Enormous lies, fully committed to, can seem self-evidently real. The story of how enemy spies became the Allies' greatest weapon reveals something fundamental about the nature of modern conflict. Wars aren't just fought with physical force, they're fought in the space between perception and reality. The side that controls that space, that can shape what the enemy believes about the world, possesses a weapon more powerful than any arsenal. But it also reveals something troubling. The techniques that worked so effectively in 1944 didn't disappear after the war. They evolved, became more sophisticated, spread beyond military applications. The discovery that you could construct alternate realities by controlling information channels opened a door that has never closed. Today we live in an information environment where the line between truth and deception is often deliberately blurred. Where multiple narratives compete, each supported by curated evidence. Where the question isn't just what is true, but who controls the channels through which truth is communicated. The tools have changed, from radio transmissions to social media algorithms, but the fundamental principle remains. Control the information environment and you control belief. Control belief and you control action. The officers of the 20 Committee understood they were engaged in a form of warfare that would outlast the specific conflict they were fighting. They were establishing templates for information warfare that would define intelligence operations for generations. When Masterman wrote The Classified History of the Double-Cross System, he noted that their work had implications that extended far beyond defeating German intelligence. They had demonstrated that in the modern age, the most decisive battles might be fought not over territory, but over what people believe. On the beaches of Normandy, soldiers fought through devastating fire to secure a foothold in occupied Europe. Their courage was real, their sacrifice undeniable. But their success was made possible by something invisible, by German commanders hundreds of kilometers away, staring at maps, making decisions based on intelligence reports that described armies that didn't exist. Those commanders weren't cowards or fools. They were professionals doing their jobs, trying to defend against what appeared to be an overwhelming threat. They deployed their forces where the evidence indicated the attack would come. The tragedy, from their perspective, was that every piece of evidence had been manufactured by their enemy. This is what made the double-cross system so devastating. It didn't defeat the Germans through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. It defeated them by making them defeat themselves, by causing them to make strategic decisions that served Allied purposes while believing they were defending their own interests. Warfare had entered a new dimension. The question was no longer just about destroying the enemy's capacity to fight, but about corrupting their capacity to think, to understand their situation, to distinguish between real threats and phantom ones. In the end, the German spies in Britain didn't fail because they were captured. They succeeded at providing exactly what British intelligence wanted them to provide. Their reports reached Berlin, were analyzed and believed, influenced strategic decisions at the highest level. From the German perspective, their intelligence network functioned perfectly. It just happened to be functioning in service of the enemy. There's a final twist to this story that captures its essential irony. After the war, when the full extent of the double-cross system became known, intelligence agencies worldwide studied it intensely, trying to understand how to replicate its success and how to avoid becoming its victims. The fear became, how do we know our sources are genuine? How do we know we're not seeing what someone wants us to see? This created a kind of paranoia in intelligence circles. If every source might be controlled, if every channel might be compromised, how do you trust any information? The British had demonstrated that comprehensive deception was possible. Now every intelligence service had to assume it might be happening to them. In a sense, this was the double-cross system's ultimate legacy, not just the specific victories it achieved in 1944, but the permanent injection of doubt into intelligence work. The knowledge that reality itself could be simulated, that your most trusted sources might be weapons pointed at your own decision-making. We still live with that knowledge today. In an age where information moves at the speed of light, where narratives can be constructed and distributed globally in hours, the lessons of 1944 remain disturbingly relevant. The tools have changed, the scale has expanded, but the fundamental truth persists. Those who control information control reality, at least for those who depend on that information to navigate the world. The Germans thought they had outwitted Churchill. They believed their intelligence networks were penetrating British defenses, revealing Allied plans, giving them the information needed to win. They never suspected they were reading a script written by their enemies. They never imagined the entire picture they had assembled from fragments of intelligence was a carefully constructed fiction. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling lesson. The most dangerous deceptions aren't the ones we recognize as lies, but the ones we incorporate into our understanding of truth. The Germans didn't disbelieve their intelligence about Fusag. They believed it completely, built strategies around it, committed real resources to counter it. The deception worked not by hiding the truth, but by making fiction indistinguishable from reality. In the fields of Kent, inflatable tanks deflated when the war ended. Radio operators dismantled their phantom networks. Double agents returned to normal lives, their roles in saving countless lives remaining classified for decades. But the weapon they had helped forge, the weaponization of belief itself, remained. It remains still. More sophisticated, more pervasive, adapted to new technologies and new conflicts. The battlefield has expanded from military intelligence to encompass entire information ecosystems. But the principle discovered in those desperate years when Britain stood alone endures. In the modern age, the deadliest weapon might not be the one that destroys the body, but the one that controls the mind. The German commanders never had a chance. Not because they were outfought, but because they were outthought. And they never knew it until it was far too late.